I was troubled by a video I saw from one of the great Torah scholars of today. I believe he is a Rosh Yeshiva in one of the major yeshivas. I won't mention it, nor will I mention his name. And the Rosh Yeshiva is a handsome man, and obviously very confident in his demeanor and the things that he says. But sometimes even the greatest of people can err due to various reasons. The particular rabbi confidently said we should embrace the Muslims as the owners and the governing body controlling the land of Israel. And the only thing we have to do to remain in the land of Israel is to pay the jizya, or the Dhimmy tax. And we will flourish. That's what the rabbi said. I don't know who the "we will flourish" he's referring to, because he is the Rosh Yeshiva of people who are very, very needy and dependent upon handouts either from the government or from wealthy Jews who understand the importance of Torah study and support it. Who are the people that he's referring to will flourish economically? Probably does not mean his students. It means others who are not his students. And he's very confident that we would be flourishing if we only would accept the authority of the Muslims. The problem with such a declaration is it ignores the hundreds, the 1,300 plus, 1,400 years of Islam. And during that period, there were periods of relative peace and periods of destruction, murder, forced conversion, all kinds of different horrible things that happened. I'm not referring to the results of the Zionist movement coming to Israel and taking over land, buying the land legitimately, but taking over land and evoking the ire and the jealousy of the Muslim population. They had been here in Israel for probably 1,800 years since the destruction. Jews lived here. Jews lived in Israel all during that period of time from the destruction on, but a small group of Jews. Most of the people who lived here throughout the centuries were not Jewish. Some were Romans, and in the past few hundred years, most of the people living here that weren't Jewish were Muslims. And those Muslims never succeeded in making the desert bloom. Israel was a wasteland, a place where hardly anybody lived, hardly anybody did anything, hardly anybody wanted to be there. People visiting Israel, the land of Israel, Holy Land, during the 19th century, including Tom Sawyer, not Tom Sawyer, the author of Tom Sawyer, he expressed dismay at the vast lack of any kind of growth and any kind of population that lived outside of certain cities, certain tended areas. There were a few tended areas where people lived, where people flourished. Most of the land was desolate. Very few people who came. Even the holy areas of Jerusalem, very few people lived there because it was so desolate and destroyed. So the Arabs were dismayed, not because there were Jews living there. There were Jews living in the Holy Land. They lived mostly in Jerusalem and Tzfas and Tiberias, and some in Hebron. Most of those Jews came when they were older, and their intent was to die there. Young people coming there, not to die, but to live, to create a land, to create a homeland, was something that they were dismayed by. And the net result was, of course, they would attack the Jews out of jealousy, out of anger, out of religious fervor. But Jews were attacked when they came en masse and developed the land. That's a historical fact. But prior to that, the communities in Israel, the communities in the entire Arab expanse, the Arab Empire, the Empire of Islam, varied. There were times that were horrific. What astounds me, from this rabbi's strong statement, is that he denies completely the realities that Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, our greatest greatest Rishon, the greatest authority in Halacha for the last 1,000 years, was the Rambam. The Rambam writes in his Igeres Hashmad, in his letter of those who are attacked religiously, who were forced to convert, as well as his letter to the Jews of Yemen, Old Igeres Taman, which expresses the observation that Jews have been persecuted in our generation to a greater extent than previous generations. That doesn't mean that there were as many people killed in the 12th century as there were during the time of the Second Temple. But he expresses the pain and the suffering of the Jewish community that knows no bounds. He's talking about the Jews under Muslim rule. How does this scholar who talks about Rambam every single day, and every single day he gives a lesson, he will quote the Rambam. How does he not accept Rambam's words concerning the reality of his time? The entire North Africa, the entire Spain, the Jewish community in those areas were forced to convert to Islam or face horrible punishments. How could he deny this? Oh, we're going to be fine. We're just going to pay the Jazeera and they're going to let us live. Don't happen that way. If Jews are successful, they will riot and they will kill us. And this has been the history that we've had throughout the centuries. Forget about the time after the first Zionists coming in the 1860s, 1880s, and so on, that preceded Herzl. Forget about the people who made the kibbutzim. During the Jewish sojourn under the Muslims, there were centuries and vast areas where the Jews were completely forced into the most demeaning conditions. How could he deny that? So we have to say that either he doesn't know his history, he never read Igeres Hashmad or Igeres Taman, and so he speaks from ignorance. Or he's so frustrated with the government trying to force Jewish yeshiva boys to go to the army that he's decided that there's a better alternative than remaining under the Jewish leadership in Israel. How does he plan on making that the Jews will accept the Muslims? I don't know if he cares, but it's clear that accepting the Muslims is not something that's going to make him happy or make his life better because the rest of the community won't do that. I mean, how's he going to get rid of all of the secular Jews? I don't know what he has in mind. But in his frustration with the government trying to force yeshiva boys to become soldiers, he fantasizes that things will be better under the Muslims. Under the Ottomans forced Jews to join their army. And those Jews who were forced to join their army fought against the Allies, fought against other Jews to some extent. And they were forced to serve, and they were thrown into the front lines, and many of them lost their lives. How can he be so blind? Obviously, his conditions and certain conditions have forced him, that have taken him out of his das, out of his mind. He's just lost his mind. He can be a great Rosh Yeshiva, have great admiration from students, but it's possible for a person to lose his mind. The Rebbe indicated somebody who made such a statement concerning not needing Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe says such a person probably has posel tefillin, has inappropriate. Well, it's because he opposed, the parades or for Lag BaOmer and things like that. So a person who does that probably has posel tefillin. But the same thing is true with this guy. This guy is out of his mind. Most likely, his tefillin aren't proper, and that's why he has improper thoughts. I have no other way of explaining it. But clearly somebody has to protest on the truth. The truth is that if we were to put ourselves under the Muslims, who knows what they would come up with? Who knows what kind of attacks they would have on the Jewish community? Another thing I'll tell you, talking, not a colleague, he's obviously a greater scholar than me, has greater influence than me, but he's probably my age. Think about it. We, for the last almost 80 years, have tasted democracy. May not like democracy, may not like the secularist part of democracy, but I, for one, I've lived in a democrat society since I came to this country, democratic government, republic, whatever you want to call it. I've lived here for 70 plus years, since 1950, 70, now close to 75 years. I'm used to be able to walk in the streets without fear of anybody calling me a name. Sometimes people call me a name, but most of the time people call me S-Claus, S-Santa Claus, because I have a white beard, and I did have a lot more weight a few months ago, so I was a portly rabbi with a white beard, so they called me Santa Claus. That's about all the persecution I've had over the years. When I was younger, my beard was red. People would call me Abraham Lincoln. So that was the extent of my persecution. I walk the streets. I say hello to people. People say hello back. I come into a store. They ask me what would I like. People treat me with dignity, and I treat them with dignity. A Jew who lived under the Dhimmy laws was not allowed to walk the same side of the street as a Muslim. Muslims were allowed to ride camels and donkeys in the street. A Jew was not allowed to, because a Jew is not allowed to be taller or higher than a Muslim. If there ever was a fight between a Jew and a Muslim, guess who would lose in court? all the time, a Jew. I mean, that's starters. That's just the start. That's the external surface of the Dhimmy laws. We've gotten used to living with freedom for 80 years in Israel, 76 years, whatever, 77 years. But we've gotten used to living in freedom. No Jew, I don't care how religious you are. I'm not talking about the crazy people from the Ture Karta who are basically deranged. We're talking about normal people. A normal person would never submit himself to the Dhimmi laws after tasting freedom. After tasting freedom, you don't give up the freedom so easily. So, to my esteemed colleague, to my esteemed rabbi, not only are you mistaken, but you're mistaken for yourself. You would never submit to those laws. It's just a pipe dream. How do you take a pipe dream and say it seriously to thousands of students who seriously listen to you? I don't know. There's a very famous speech by Henry Clay. I know you don't know Henry Clay because you're a Rosh Yeshiva and you never studied American history. But he concluded the speech by saying, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. People who've tasted liberty would go to their death rather than give it up. That's the reality. And I'm saddened that there is a scholar who thinks we can go back to those days. Those days are hundreds of years in our past. Those days were false images. The Muslims tolerated us and were decent to us only at certain times, not all times. Depended 50% of the time, 40% of the time, 60%, it doesn't make a difference. But hundreds of years we suffered under them. No respectable Jew would want to go back to that. None, not even you, my dear Rosh Yeshiva.